Eli Myers projected the image of a man who had mastered the art of success. A shrewd market trader dealing in fine clothes, he operated under the name Jack Marsh, his mobile shop weaving through bustling market squares, his brick-and-mortar establishment entrusted to his brother, Louis. The profits flowed steadily, but luck favored him beyond business. His fortune swelled with every roll of the dice, every turn of the card. In December 1960, fate smiled once more. The football syndicate he belonged to struck gold, and Eli pocketed a handsome £1,275. And Eli boasted. Endlessly, recklessly. His victory became his anthem, his triumph worn like armor, until it became a target. Until it marked him for what was to come. On the evening of Friday, February 24, 1961, the rhythm of his life continued undisturbed. At precisely 6:15 p.m., in the quiet presence of his brother, Eli counted the day's takings, roughly £40. He might have felt secure in that moment. He might have thought his luck would stretch on forever. But fortune is fickle. And fate can sometimes have other plans for you. Eli returned to Louis's house, the weight of the evening pressing against his shoulders. Over dinner, he counted the money once more, the crisp notes slipping between his fingers. With deliberate precision, he handed Louis a fiver, tomorrow's cash float for the shop, a necessary precaution. Sometime after 9:30 p.m., Eli stepped back into the night, his shadow stretching long under the dim streetlights. He made his way to Hare Hills Avenue, the rendezvous with his business contact nothing more than a brief exchange, words spoken in hushed tones, a deal sealed with a nod. By 10 p.m., he reached his semi-detached home on Chelwood Avenue, the quiet streets of Leeds betraying no hint of what was to come. Next door, Hilda Harris sat with a book, the rhythmic ticking of the clock filling the silence. Then, abruptly, her neighbor's house erupted with noise. She froze. Raised voices. The unmistakable crash of objects hurled in fury. Eli lived alone. Yet the chaos raged on, stretching past 20 long, agonizing minutes. The walls trembled with conflict, but Hilda did nothing. She didn't knock. Didn't call the police. And as the silence finally crept back in, she wondered, just for a moment, if she should have. Each morning, before the markets beckoned, Eli Myers made his customary stop at Louis's shop, a ritual as steady as the ticking clock. But when Saturday arrived and Eli was nowhere to be seen, unease began to creep in. By 1:15 p.m., Louis, driven by a gnawing concern, set off for his brother's house. He knocked sharply at the front door. Silence. No movement beyond the glass. A chill ran through him. He circled to the back and there, fractured shards glinting in the light, a broken pane in the French windows. Swallowing hard, he stepped inside. The air was heavy, charged with an unspoken violence. Drawers had been ripped open, their contents flung haphazardly like scattered confessions. Louis's pulse hammered in his ears. But the true horror awaited him in the living room. His brother lay there. Blooded. Broken. The brutality of it was undeniable, staining the floor in silent testimony to what had transpired. With trembling hands, Louis reached for the telephone. The authorities were called. A murder investigation was underway. Detective Chief Superintendent Thomas Bowman was a man who noticed patterns, and this one was impossible to ignore. Barely a day after Eli Myers's murder, whispers had begun to surface, a man desperately attempting to offload an unusually large quantity of clothing. The lead came from Mr. Ballatoni, a man with deep roots in the clothing trade. On the night of February 25th, as the hum of conversation filled the Nag's Head Hotel in Chapeltown, he was approached, an offer placed before him in low, measured tones. 200, perhaps 300 pairs of trousers. A deal to be made. At first, Eli Myers came to mind, his reputation for commerce well known. But then the murder. The brutal crime that changed everything. With unease creeping into his thoughts, Ballatoni did the only thing he could. He went to the police. He gave them a name. By the early hours of February 26th, uniformed officers moved in, swift and precise. Their target, Zsiga Pankotia, a 31-year-old Hungarian who had lived in England for over a decade. The questions were about to begin. The investigation wasted no time. The brutal struggle at Chelwood Avenue had left its mark, and whoever had fought Eli Myers that night would almost certainly bear the evidence, blood-stained, unmistakable. Detectives scrutinized Zsiga Pankotia's clothing, searching for the proof they needed. At first, there was little to find. No glaring red stains smeared across his shirt, no telltale splashes on his trousers. But then, his wristwatch. Tiny traces of blood clung to the metal, the type matching that of the murdered man. That alone was damning enough. But worse was yet to come. The pullover Pankotia wore when he was taken in, identified as one belonging to Eli Myers himself. Then, the search of his home on Woodland Lane, Chapeltown, unearthed more, a fresh jacket, just like those sold from Myers's mobile shop. And then the final discovery. A derelict garage on the outskirts of town. Abandoned. Silent. But inside, the truth lay scattered, bundles of new clothing discarded in haste, as if someone had been desperate to erase their tracks. And among them, blood-stained garments, worn and used. Items proven to belong to Zsiga Pankotia. The net was tightening. And there would be no slipping through. Faced with the mounting evidence, Zsiga Pankotia had no room to maneuver. The truth pressed in from every angle, undeniable and absolute. And so, at last, he confessed, admitting that he had broken into Eli Myers's home, wrestled with him, and killed him. With that admission, the charge was set: murder, committed in furtherance of theft, a crime that carried the gravest of consequences. If convicted, Pankotia would face the death penalty. On February 27th, he stood before the magistrate for the first time. The case was laid out in brief, its chilling details punctuating the silence of the courtroom. At the magistrate's request, Mr. Lythe was appointed to lead the defense. Pankotia was remanded, first to March 6th, then again to March 13th, when the weight of his fate grew heavier. Finally, on April 24th, the trial began in Leeds. Seated before Mr. Justice Ashworth, the courtroom became a battleground, where legal minds sparred over truth and consequence. The Crown's case was led by Mr. Alistair Sharp, flanked by Mr. Gilbert Hartley, their arguments sharp as steel. On the other side, Pankotia's fate rested in the hands of Mr. Henry C. Scott and Mr. Charles Raymond Dean, tasked with the near-impossible fight for his defense. For 3 days, the trial unfolded, each word, each accusation shaping the course of justice. As the trial unfolded, the weight of evidence continued to mount. Louis Myers had already traced his brother's final movements. Hilda Harris had provided chilling details of the violent argument heard through thin walls. But now, fresh testimony emerged, another voice to stitch the events of that fateful night together. Mr. J. Spence, a young man passing through Chelwood Avenue with his fiancée at precisely 10:30 p.m. on February 24th, recalled seeing a van reversing out of Eli Myers's driveway. Its hurried retreat, the way it merged into the night, it all pointed to one grim possibility: Pankotia escaping the scene of his crime. Then came the forensic revelations. Cold. Clinical. Devastating. Dr. Alistair Stewart Ritchie-Sinton and Professor Cyril J. Paulson presented their findings, painting a portrait of violence in cold, precise strokes. The dining room carpet, soaked with blood, silent testimony to the ferocity of the struggle. In the kitchen, a bread knife, stained crimson, resting on the table like an abandoned weapon. Near Eli's lifeless body lay a wallet, his wallet. But where there had once been cash, now there was only emptiness. The case was closing in. The evidence, unrelenting. The courtroom fell into a hush as the details of Eli Myers's injuries were laid bare. The violence had been relentless. Multiple wounds marred his scalp and face, struck by some blunt instrument, a chair, perhaps, wielded in fury. Then, the blade. The bread knife, its serrated edge turned into a weapon, leaving cruel lacerations. The brutality of it was undeniable. His nasal bones fractured. His upper teeth displaced. The true horror, though, was in the cause of death, a fatal hemorrhage, the relentless bleeding compounded by the blockage of his nasal airway. Slowly, inexorably, the life had been choked from him. Then, the accused stepped forward. Zsiga Pankotia entered the witness box, facing the weight of judgment. His voice, steady but taut, carried through the courtroom as he spoke of his life in Leeds, a city he had called home since September 1952. In those years, he had forged connections, fellow Hungarians who had crossed his path. Among them, one name stood out: Papo, a man who had worked for Eli Myers. The courtroom listened. But would they believe? The plot had been set in motion weeks before. In a dimly lit public house, Papo leaned in close, his voice hushed, his words deliberate. There was an opportunity, he said, one that could be lucrative if handled correctly. Eli Myers had a habit of carrying large sums, sometimes as much as £200, maybe £300, particularly on Fridays and Saturdays. The trick, Papo insisted, was to strike swiftly. But there was a complication. Papo couldn't carry out the robbery himself, too many eyes knew his face. He needed someone else. Someone willing. That someone was Zsiga Pankotia. The morning of February 24th brought fresh urgency. Papo had seen Eli Myers carrying 2 bundles of cash, and if there was ever a moment to act, it was now. That night, Pankotia moved in. Dressed for anonymity, overalls, a leather jacket, a black cap, gloves, he slipped through the shadows, his silhouette blending into the night. He approached the house with calculated intent, forcing his way through the French windows, the glass giving way to his intrusion. Silence greeted him. The house was empty. With steady hands, he switched on the torch he had brought with him, its beams slicing through the darkness. Methodically, he began his search, starting upstairs, where secrets lay waiting in the dim corners. But soon the silence would break. Pankotia had come prepared. He tore the light fittings from the kitchen, twisting them free with cold precision, placing the bulbs into the sink, insurance against discovery. If Myers returned unexpectedly, he would be plunged into darkness, unable to see his intruder. An easy escape. A clean getaway. But fate had other plans. Eli Myers did come home. And what he found shattered the stillness of the night, a shadow moving within his walls. Instinct took over. He confronted the intruder, his voice sharp, his presence defiant. Then, chaos. A violent struggle erupted, neither man willing to yield. It raged through the house, crashing into walls, overturning furniture, dragging on in a relentless battle that stretched a full 30 minutes, each second a fight for control, for survival. Then the final act. Pankotia's hands found the bread knife resting on the table. Without hesitation, he drove the blade into Myers. One decisive plunge. The fight was over. Pankotia fled. The trial left little doubt. The jury weighed the evidence, and their verdict came swiftly, guilty. The crime had been committed in furtherance of theft, sealing Pankotia's fate. The sentence, death. An appeal followed, heard on June 5 before Justices Slade, Glyn-Jones, and Megor. Pankotia's defense team did not dispute the break-in, nor the vicious struggle that had left Myers battered. But one crucial question remained: was it truly those injuries that had taken his life? The courtroom held its breath. Pankotia's hands found the bread knife resting on the table. Without hesitation, he drove the blade into Myers. One decisive plunge. The fight was over. Pankotia fled. The trial left little doubt. The jury weighed the evidence, and their verdict came swiftly, guilty. The crime had been committed in furtherance of theft, sealing Pankotia's fate. The sentence, death. An appeal followed, heard on June 5 before Justices Slade, Glyn-Jones, and Megor. Pankotia's defense team did not dispute the break-in, nor the vicious struggle that had left Myers battered. But one crucial question remained: was it truly those injuries that had taken his life? The courtroom held its breath. The courtroom fell into silence as the evidence of Professor Paulson was read aloud. His assessment was precise, methodical. Death had resulted from shock caused by multiple injuries, exacerbated by a pre-existing disease of the arteries. A grim reality unfolded in his words. Yet, amid the certainty, a sliver of doubt emerged. At trial, Professor Paulson conceded that the injuries had precipitated death, yet in theory, arterial disease alone might have claimed Myers's life at any time. It was a possibility, however remote. Justice Slade seized on the point, noting aloud that Paulson seemed to acknowledge that there was a chance, however slight, that Myers might have died regardless of the attack. But the judges were not convinced. The courtroom listened in silence as the evidence of Professor Cyril J. Paulson was read aloud, his words cutting through the air with clinical precision. Death, he stated, had been caused by shock, brought on by multiple injuries, exacerbated by a pre-existing disease of the arteries. The brutality of the attack had, in all likelihood, triggered the final collapse. Yet, within the certainty lay a flicker of doubt. At trial, Paulson had conceded that the injuries had precipitated death, but he acknowledged that arterial disease alone could have taken Eli Myers at any time. The possibility, however remote, lingered in the margins of the case. Justice Slade seized on the point, remarking that Paulson appeared to agree that there was at least some chance, however slim, that Pankotia's assault had played no role in Myers's death. But the court was not swayed. The judges ruled with cold certainty. The fight had lasted nearly 30 minutes. Myers had suffered. His death had followed, not immediately, but after considerable time. The likelihood was undeniable. The injuries inflicted had led directly to his demise. And Pankotia had admitted he was responsible. As the hour of execution loomed, Pankotia turned to faith. Less than 24 hours before he was due to die, he was received into the Church of England by the Bishop of Ripon, the Right Reverend John Moorman. A quiet absolution before the inevitable. Then, the morning of June 29, 1961 arrived. At Leeds prison, executioners Harry Allen and Harry Robinson carried out their solemn duty. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. No crowd gathered. No protest. No spectacle. Just the quiet end of a life marked by violence.